Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm joined by Hafsa Mohamed. She's co-founder of United Women of the Horn, and she has also been very active advocate for Tigray for the past 3 years in relation to the Tigray war. And as part of her advocacy for Tigray, she wrote a very powerful essay titled Solidarity from Addis Standard a couple of days ago. And we're going to talk about her essay and some of her activism and other things that she has learned the past 3 years. And thank you, Hafsa, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tafla, for having me. And I really appreciate the introduction. It's a pleasure.
It's my immense pleasure. So I think a lot of my listeners will not be familiar with you, Hafsa. Maybe those on Twitter and other social media accounts will, I think, fairly know you because you've been very active and a very prominent voice. But just to make sure that um, we are inclusive to the other people that who might not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, how you ended up advocating for Tigray, and stuff like that.
Again, thank you so much, Tafla. Well, hello to all your viewers and listeners. My name is Hafsa Mohamed. I'm Somali. I'm based in California. I'm from California. And I've been living in Ethiopia between 2015 and 2020. And that's when I got to, of course, connect back with where I'm from and the different communities out there, and got to learn so much, got to better perfect my Somali, and also, of course, understand other languages of that country. And while I was out there, of course, I implemented and learned a lot in terms of like my background when it comes to community organizing, sociology, and things like that, and women's rights issues and advocacy. And so while living out there, of course, outside of learning a lot, I was able to make amazing friends, learn so many, different things. And then, of course, I was able to, now utilizing language that I utilized in that essay, found verbiage or like words to label the experiences that I had or have, and also like what's happening currently right now in places like Tigray. But in around 2018 is when I started to see differences, and of course impacted directly, and seeing, in terms of like the change. So I was able to see what was before 2018 and then after 2018, and then do that comparison, and then see the communities are impacted, the practices. So yeah, I learned a lot. And then when it comes to, of course, you're asking some questions on that, when it comes to the Tigray war and my personal experiences.
Brilliant. So I think maybe if you could tell us your your journey in relation to Tigray, how come you ended up becoming a very important member of the Tigrayan community? What was the story like? What is your story in relation to Tigray activism, and how did you find out about the war? I know that in the essay that I mentioned, you briefly talk about what the experience was like for you when you heard about the war, and when you heard about your friends being arrested and put into concentration camps, and the pain that it caused on you. But tell us in a little bit of a detail about that part of your journey.
All right. So around 2018, I'll start from 2018 when the first, after April happened, April 2018, I believe, when sorry about that. When April 2018 happened with Eddie when he came into power, and then one of the first regions that were attacked, and like completely in like the most shocking way, because I was staying in the city center. I was staying right in the, I just came back from California. It was like August 4th. And I'd never forget that. Every time that August 4th would come around after 2018, which is also my sister's birthday, I would leave to Somaliland. So I remember staying in the city center, and all of a sudden it was like, I believe it was a Saturday morning, and I just seen tanks roll through the city. and I seen the Somali community was outside, and they were like chanting like "Get out of the city" to the Ethiopian soldiers, the ENDF soldiers. And I'm watching everything from my window, like, okay, this is weird. Like, why are all these tanks coming like inside the city? And then all of a sudden, everything changed. Like, it was just so fast, right? The internet went down, the phones went down, the lights went out, the water went out, and I was like, okay, this is like something's about to like go down. Gunshots, the ENDF and the federal police shooting civilians, and then of course regional forces attempting to fight back, of course, because they're loyal to, I guess, the community that they represent, which is the Somali community. And I'm watching all of this, like saying this cannot be happening. I'm trying to communicate with my family. Nobody's like, nothing's going on in terms of the internet. Before they cut off the phone, I believe one of the last things that they cut off the regular phone. But while it was working, of course, I'm contacting, calling internationally. I'm trying to get hold of the US Embassy. And it was just such a horrifying experience, because even while talking to the US Embassy, I'm like, there's a lot of tanks in the city, like, people are being killed and stuff. And they're like, oh, I don't think that's what's happening. We were told something different. I was like, I don't know what, you guys were told, but I'm right here. I see it. There's not one tank. There's not one bus of soldiers. This is like a, invasion. And I was there for several days, like there was no access to food. There was the ENDF would advance, and then it was a regional forces that would advance. The community started fighting too. Like, of course, people in cities like Jijiga, people live together. And then it was like the Somalis would attack the non-Somalis, and non-Somalis would be attacking the Somalis. And and at one point when the federal soldiers would come in, they would be like, oh, you're Somali, and they would try to, harass us and stuff. And then the same thing with sometimes with Somali soldiers, but not so much. As I watched that, I was of course physically like beaten or assaulted, because they're like, okay, you're this ethnicity or that ethnicity. And it was just not having food was like quite the experience. I remember going to a shop right across from us at one time when the fighting stopped to like loot and steal yogurt. And then ENDF or like a federal police, a non-Somali, came and just shot at everybody inside the store. I remember trying to walk to the airport, and airports in the Somali region are not controlled by Somali forces. It's controlled by the Ethiopian forces, and they would just shoot at everyone. It was just it was like several days of horror. And then I managed to get to Somaliland. And what I recall when I got to Somaliland was, of course, they have amazing internet. It's not like Ethiopia, and good food. I did like a thread about what I experienced. And then I was contacted by someone senior within the Ethiopian government, or just like in general, like if you want to come back, because I ran away, all my stuff was still in Ethiopia. You have to remove your Twitter thread. Because I was talking explicitly about what happened. Can you hear me, Taklai? Are you able to hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
So it was just, that's when I probably woke up. I was like, yeah, I was enjoying Ethiopia until that happened. Like, well, who does that? Like, why would a government, attack its own people like that? Like, it was just such an, I'm like, I know we're Somali, because the Somalis, of course, were like, as soon as ENDF came in, there was no more Ethiopian flags. It would just turn into Somalia. It was quite like, it was so funny. Everyone's like, yeah, we're not even Ethiopian. But I was like, what kind of government does that? And then on top of that, I didn't even have a following then or anything, but why would I be communicated with and be told, take that, like, erase your thread? And I did erase my thread because I was afraid I had to still fly back to Addis from Hargeisa, Somaliland. I can continue, but I mean.
Yeah, what Hafsa, that's interesting that you say that was the moment you really had some sort of awakening in terms of what was happening. And I'm just trying to guess, August of 2018, the president of Somalia, of Ethiopia, then would have been Abdi Ile, right? Or would that the current one?
No, it was Abdi at that time.
So would that? Yeah, so I'm trying to pinpoint the situation that were they trying to capture him because there was some sort of conflict between the regime forces from Addis Ababa and the Somali special forces when Abiy was trying to capture Abdil, I believe. That would have been the time, or am I getting something wrong?
No, it was that time. It was
so when you say you had no, I'm going to try to press you on this because, most of the discussions around Ethiopian politics don't really give any sort of emphasis to what happens in Somalia. So this is a wonderful opportunity actually for us to talk about what happens in Jigjiga and Hargeisa as well. So I'm really interested, and I'm sure everybody would be interested to know that the dynamic there. So when you say that you had a moment of awakening, what do you mean? What sort of expectations did you have when you first decide to go there?
I,
And what did the thing that you witnessed firsthand teach you?
I mean, those are great questions. Thank you for asking. I think I did not. I don't think I've ever had serious expectations when it comes to like the peripheral and when it comes to how the federal government is set up in Ethiopia or just Addis or other or quote unquote highland to the Somali region. I don't think I've ever had any expectation. I understood the differences. I understand Somalis are very like to themselves. That's the region. They don't mix. They're just minding their own for the most part. But because it was that region is part of Ethiopia, I didn't. But it has happened in the past where ENDF is killing Somalis. But at that level, it was just seeing it firsthand in real time was very shocking. And there was no mercy. There were the ENDF were saying all sorts of slurs towards Somali people. They were when they managed to get into the city, I also realized that a lot of the community members that live with Somali people or live there, as soon as ENDF came in, they were so happy because they identified with them. Like, and which is fine, I guess, for them. But for us, it was terrorizing. For like Somali people, it was terrorizing. But like, say maybe some of the local Amhars and stuff, they were so happy. And maybe for them, it was like relief they're going to be protected, or they felt like they're going to be protected. But ENDF should be like maybe an entity that protects everyone, right? If that's what it is, it's the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. But and then on top of that, it was seeing those differences. Like, yeah, we're part. Yeah, it might be the second largest region, but we're really not necessarily part of the country. And then when I got to Somaliland, I felt at home, of course. I remember trying to get back to Addis because, of course, all my stuff was still in Ethiopia, and I needed to book a flight. And then that's when I always knew Ethiopian Airlines was also trash. But when the $150 ticket went from 150 to 1,000 something to like $2,000, like profiteering from the conflict, they knew all these Somalis ran away, and they said it's time to make money. And that's when I was like, this airline is also trash. That was also another awakening, but I already knew. It was just seeing it happen to you. You're like, this is absolutely insane.
With the impression you had then when the END forces came to Jigjiga, that the people of Jigjiga saw the ANDF as a foreign force or even as an invading force, would that the understanding of the people?
Of course, yeah. Nobody felt safe. And even now, after the relocation from, the Tigray war, they're, stationing them in the Somali region. There's a lot of these attacks on civilians. Like nobody looks at ENDF and goes, those are our forces. But, yeah.
So interesting. I mean, you are from well, technically speaking, I'm going to, ask Ethiopian, and interesting you say that you felt at home more in Hargeisa than you did in Jigjiga.
Yeah, at that moment when ENDF
and that's interesting. So how would you again, I wasn't prepared for this conversation, Hafsa, so I don't know how far I should push you on this, but I'm fascinated to know how you would. What are your sensibilities now? Like, how do you like to identify? Is there a part of you that identifies as an Ethiopian, or that is dead?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I'm Somali. Of course, Ethiopian is a nationality, but I don't think Somalis go around saying, "Oh, we're Ethiopian." Of course, it's a part of that country, and of course that everyone should have equal rights and the amount of representation and resources. But of course, I don't think any Somali goes around, I mean, saying that they are Ethiopian. It's a nationality, but definitely not. I've always identified as Somali. And yeah.
But one of the narrative that the current president tries to push is that Somalis generally now feel more Ethiopian than they did before. And I don't know how much grounding that claim has, if it's something that he says for political convenience or if it has some element of truth. What do you think? Have you heard him say that? I think he He says that every time he's on TV. That is at least the impression that I get.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he speaks for the people in that sense. And when it comes to like, I know some people who experienced Ethiopia or the Somali region after 2018. And then, of course, I was able to experience both. I would say prior to 2018, the concept of multinational federalism, this celebration of Hidar, something, where people are like, you're from Gambela, you're from the Somali region, but we're all together and we're all coming together and celebrating each other. I feel like at that time, then you can say something like, okay, we're Ethiopian together, perhaps, maybe at that time. But now I don't think so, not at all. But I know, of course, Mustafa say a lot of things in media appearances. He's proficient, in Amharic. So whatever he says, the Somali people are not like even understanding it, at least in Amharic. They're not like really attentive to that. But the other Ethiopian community members or like Ethiopians, maybe from the Amharic region, really do appreciate his nationalism. But yeah.
And just one more sort of admittedly very, very silly question, Hafsa, but just out of curiosity, you said that when you went to Hargeisa, you felt at home, and you said that they had better internet. That doesn't surprise me. But apart from better internet, otherwise culturally, how would you describe Jigijiga and Hargeisa, the people, the way people live, their food, and generally the way they go about their lives? Would you say there is some sort of cultural difference that might have sort of originated from the fact that Jijiga is inside Ethiopia, or you didn't really discern any sort of cultural difference?
Not necessarily amongst the Somali community, not so much, maybe like a slight dialect difference, but like outside of that, it's just the Somalis are, the same across, for the most part, outside of the dialects and different maybe cultural practices. I didn't, differentiate between the Somali communities that were in Somaliland or in Jijiga, but I think the main difference would be like I'm in a country that's, all Somali and their army Somali, everywhere Somali, right? Rather than in Jijiga where it's like everyone's Somali, but at the same time, they're different community members, which is fine, I guess. But like I say, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of expansionism or people who are coming from different parts of the country settling there. So the whole demographics are changing to the point where maybe Tajiga will be up for like some sort of self-administration like they did in maybe Didadawa. And maybe that could be the plan of like Eddie's, but I don't like in terms of Somali people, they're kind of, they're quite similar. But I felt more at home, of course, at that moment. I felt safe.
Well, I think we're going to have to park this train at that because we have the Tigray thing to discuss. But I'm really I'm fascinated by the dynamic Somaliland and Somali proper. So maybe I'm going to push you to give me another interview another time. Maybe you'll have to promise me that now. And we're going to return to Tigray, and we're going to start by some of the very, very powerful points you raised in the essay. Hafsa, you said that solidarity is the most important thing to you, and you say that the concept, the essence of solidarity really clocked on you or really occurred to you when something happened to you. And maybe we could start with the thing that happened to you that sort of made you sit down and reflect on solidarity and come to the conclusion that solidarity is such a powerful and profound thing.
Yeah, so truthfully, first of all, thank you for asking me about my experience in like 2018. I don't think I ever publicly talked too much about it because it was such a horrific experience. But when it comes to the concept of solidarity, I would say it was like a series of events. After 2018, I was very alert or like attentive about what was happening around me. And then I started to realize people's businesses or their properties being taken or them being labeled like nasty names. And I was like, why is this happening? I know there was this false sense of freedom of speech, even though it turned into hate speech so fast. But it was a series of events that occurred to me. And I think the most, of course, challenging ones were, of course, being personally arrested after, on a night out with friends. And then because there was Tigrayan music playing, police that like different soldiers, like different, like at that hour, in the evening, there's a federal police that roams. They came in and they knock down certain things, shut down the music. At first I was like, okay, something's happening, maybe they're looking for someone. And then they lined everybody up, asked for ethnicities or like where you're from and things like that. And I was like, well, I'm American, like nothing's gonna happen to me type of thing. Or I'm Somali, like I'm not involved. And I realized they arrested the Oromos, the Tigrayans, and of course the few Somalis were there, but they let go Amharas. I mean, and I don't know if after this interview's aired, a lot of people kind of be like, oh, what are you talking about? But truthfully, I was surprised by that. And then when we were taken to like a school, like something that looked like a school outside of like the outskirts of Addis, there was like so many people there. And that's when that was like, of course, in 2020. And I was like, oh my God, like then I did my serious reflection of course I got to leave the country and things like that. But a series of events like going into a store with my friend, and then she would confidently and I started to also personally check myself afterwards, and I feel like maybe I was a terrible friend. Like it was like 2019 or 2020, I have friends that would go into like in the Boy area, like a store, and she would confidently like ask for things in Tigrinya or like say hello in Tigrinya, and people would look at us or look at her, and I'd always be like, oh my God, like, you know, so and so got arrested, you know, stuff like that, please, you know. And she didn't care. So now I really appreciate it. But before I would say I was afraid. So I feel like there was a series of events that made me reflect on my bad friend. Was I like also policing people? But when it really did impact me and I went to jail for a couple of days, I was like, yeah, this is so real. But yeah, so
What you, yes. So interesting that you mentioned the fact that policemen came and well, I mean, warmed the door of the bar that you were having fun in, and they started arresting people simply because they were Tigrans based on their ID. And you mentioned in the essay that you begged the security officers or the policemen or whoever they were who were doing the arresting not to do what they were doing, and they didn't really heed to what you were saying. They didn't listen to what you were saying, and that was part of the reason why it was a very, very painful experience for you, knowing that people who are totally innocent, who have done nothing, were being arrested simply for who they are. And what was the feeling? I understand that it's not easy now to maybe to capture what exactly you would have felt then, but try as best as you could to sort of give us a picture of what you were feeling then when they were taking your friends away and you were begging them and they were not listening to you.
So it being in that detention center or like a concentration camp, I remember there were a lot of kids there, and I witnessed like in commute, like I don't know if you know Bola Mikhail, where the Somalis stay. There's like different people that always come there. A lot of people too in like the institution that you know need money or like you know are begging and stuff like that. And I recognize that the people who had particular kind of haircuts, which are like people from like Tigray, the little kids and stuff, everybody went missing. That was like in the beginning. But when I was in that particular detention center, I realized there were a lot of kids with those similar haircuts and stuff. And then I remember when it was my turn, like, oh, you're Somali, you're American, you can go. I was like, oh, can some, you know, cause of course, outside of the people that were there, like friends, well, I'm like, what about the children? And I remember one of the soldiers there was like, if you want to, you know, stay with them, you can, because they're not leaving. And I just was like, of course, at that moment, I had to put myself first and I had to leave. But imagine there's like 4-year-olds, and I was like, please, can they go as well? I mean, you can keep the adults maybe, but just please, you know, like it was just one of those moments where I had to put myself first or in order to leave the country. But I mean, I regret it. So I feel like it's a form of survival's remorse or survival's guilt, because it was like I was able to leave. And a lot of those people are probably not alive at the moment or something. And I think I have this conversation with my brother all the time because he left with me. And he's all like, remember those like people that we've seen? Like, what if they're not alive anymore? Like, you know, how lucky you are and stuff to be able to leave. So I would say it's guilt. Could I have done something maybe different? Could I have maybe even stayed, you know? But it's amazing.
But when the policemen were arresting people simply because they were Tigrans, were they very, very blunt about what they were doing? Did they say that, well, we're arresting you simply because you are Tigrans, or they sort of created some sort of excuse, for instance, saying that we suspect you, or we are being cautious, or we are trying to make sure that you don't become a sort of target of attack from angry people? Was there any attempt on the part of the people doing the detention to explain what they were doing, or it was enough for them to say, we're going to arrest you because, well, we can?
Yeah, no, I've seen both instances where they would say, "Oh, you're suspected of like terrorism or like, terrorizing community members, like you've committed a crime," but it was just people with particular kind of names, people with scars on their face, like, all the symbols for some of the people that are from Tigray. And other times it would just simply be like, "Oh, they look at the name and then, oh, you're Tigrayan." And some of them are Eritrean, and they'd be like, "Yeah," and then they would get locked up. There was no like, they did not make an effort. I mean, I witnessed it enough times that they did not make that effort to make it seem like people were being targeted for some other issue. It was simply because of their ethnicity.
Hmm. So that horrible experience and other similar experiences sort of well, convince you to become a very, very important voice for Tigray and to become an integral part of the or member of the Tigrayan community, to advocate for Tigray, to write for Tigray, to tweet for Tigray, to do a number of things for Tigray, and in the process to become a very, very loved member of the Tigrayan community. And what had the journey for the past 3 years been like for you? Or how has it been like to to hang out with Tigrayans and to learn the culture, to spend time with them? What things have you learned? Um, well, apart from receiving some sort of love through solidarity, of course, in the essay you say that solidarity is one expression of love, and maybe I'm going to ask you about that later. But what are the things that the Tigrayan community has taught you as of now?
I mean, I think the cool part is like when I was able to reflect on the times I were actually living in Ethiopia. At one time, I was living with a lot of my friends. I realized that the majority of them were Tigrayan. And I was like, I realized the cultural differences between some of the communities, and that's to no offense to certain communities either. But I realized that I was like, yo, remember so and so, remember so and so, they're Tigrayan. No wonder, like we're able to get along. Like they have such amazing culture. They're very kind. They're like very similar, in my opinion, to like Somali people. And then afterwards, in the last 3 years, I was able to make great friends, like my sisters Mabel and Hausen, and a lot of other people. Even here in the U.S., I've had like friends already. I was like, so and so Tigrayan, because then I was able to, like, I wouldn't say differentiate, but I was able to like, what if this person isn't from that community and they support the war on them? Like I had to like have that realization. I was like, is so and so like from there? Do they support this? But the experience has always been positive when it comes to Tigrayan communities. Like they're very welcoming, they're very supportive, they're very kind, they're very like, in other cultures I've realized it's like, oh, very reserved. But I think it's been a good experience, honestly. And I also, like, one of the reflections that I had, one of my good friends is also she's in Sweden. I remember, like, I don't think community members or friends that I had from the Amhara region or other places would come with me to the rural parts of the Somali region. I remember one of my friends, and she's Tigrayan, she came with me to a rural part of the Somali region where people usually don't go. And she didn't care. She had her bati on. She lit up the cigarette, and she was just chilling. I was like, oh, imagine, like, and if I told one of my other friends to come, they're like, oh my God, it's so scary out there. And then when I was able to look back, I was like, so and so's Tigrayan. That makes sense. She wasn't afraid.
Hmm.
It's always been a
Hmm.
positive.
Yeah. In the essay, another point that you raise is that Tigrayans have, for the most part, been abandoned for the past 3 years. And do you think that the reason for that might be because other people don't really know what was happening in Tigray? I think, for instance, in your case, because you witnessed firsthand what was being done to Tigrayans, what happened to your friends, and because you had that personal connection, that personal experience, because also you witnessed the barbaric nature of the AND forces in Jijiga. So you have a sort of personal experience, and I think it would be reasonable to say that that made it easy for you to stand in solidarity with Tigray because of that personal connection and personal experience. And do you suspect the reason why not many people stood in solidarity with Tigray might be because they don't have that connection? really they couldn't really connect with what was happening in Tigray. Would you at least would you say that might be part of the explanation?
That could possibly be part of the explanation, but I think it's a concept of humanity. Like if you read and you see the footage and you see people's personal testimonies, I don't understand how anybody could, stand there and say, well, that's a lie. And I see that in, certain communities that are also from that are from Ethiopia. They'll be like, that's not true. And I was like, well, I mean, like who would, it's all facts. Like, how is it not true? So I think it's a concept of humanity. Like, I don't know how people are still not able to stand in solidarity. People do have, maybe their differences to political entities, to TPLF or EPRDF or whatever, or EPP and stuff. That's a political entity, or maybe even political individuals. But a whole entire, community and people to just group that with a few politicians is, I think, unacceptable. But I would say it's a matter of humanity. I don't think, I mean, of course, I would say having that experience showed me that ENDF is cruel. And I've seen the things that they've done in just a couple of days or like several days, right? So I can just imagine what they could have possibly done unchecked for 3 basically years and up until now, especially when there's no internet. It's not hard, it's not rocket science. So I'm always like surprised denying someone's pain or a community's pain.
Yep, I mean, in Ethiopia, as you will be aware, there are a lot of unresolved problems. One of them is the nature of Ethiopia. What is Ethiopia? Is it a country, or is it just a hodgepodge of different people who don't really understand one another, who don't have sympathy for one another, and who would be better off going their own ways? And there are a number of other views about Ethiopia, an enigma as a concept, as an entity, Ethiopia. And on the one hand, there are people like you who now, for all intents and purposes, is part of the Tigrayan community. You understand the pain of Tigrayans, and I'm sure Tigrayans would understand the pain of you. So when you, for instance, started mentioning about what was happening in Jigajiga, I could immediately connect with what people might have been going through. And I think part of the reason why it's easy for me to connect with the suffering that the Somali people might be going through is because I have witnessed the pain that Tigrayans have gone through. And I think that makes it easy for me to empathize and to sympathize. And I wonder if, one of the reasons why there is no really any bonding or connection among Ethiopian people is because they find it very, very difficult to connect with one another at that level. I don't know if you would like to reflect on that. I understand I'm trying to be a little bit more sort of philosophical than we planned for the conversation, but I don't know if you have some views about that, about what it is that you think should happen for people in Ethiopia to really have a sense of solidarity and empathy and sympathy for one another.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I also ask myself that because I see the stark difference. Like, say if someone's getting hurt right here, a Somali person will 100% intervene and try to support that person if something wrong is happening, regardless of if the person's Somali, Muslim, non-Muslim, it doesn't matter. But I've noticed in a country like Ethiopia, someone could be getting hurt right there, and it's just none of their business. That's why I would always be so scared, and I say this even if it would happen in the U.S., for anything bad to happen to me around an Ethiopian person, because they will just act. And that's just that's really like maybe a really serious generalization, but honestly, they don't, that culture of like, oh, Tuklai is getting hurt right here, let me help Tuklai. It's like, Tuklai is getting hurt over here, let me mind my own business, I didn't see it. And that's on a mass level. So what's happening in Tigray, people would be even scared to talk about it. Like nobody had that like level of bravado. Like I've noticed, or just humanity, or maybe it's just a culture, I don't know, but I noticed that within Somali community they would be talking about the start of the war on Tigray. They'd say this is happening, oh my god, like people were actually vocal about it. And then other communities, they'd be scared. I was like, well, people got killed, and they're like let's not talk about it. So I don't know what it is philosophically. That's a really good question, and I think there probably should be a study, because it is just a level of like moral like decay that exists, where people do not intervene, do not get involved when their own neighbor and their own brother or sister is getting hurt right there. It's just, it's just.
Well, I mean, a few weeks ago, I was reading Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you know her. She has she it was about what her thesis is. One of her thesis about is about the Nazi Germany, and she wonders why the Nazis did what they did, from taking the Jews to concentration camps and put them into gas chambers and all sorts of extremely cruel things. And there are many theories as to why the Nazis felt compelled to do that. One thesis is that is because they had cruel intentions and they wanted to just cruelly eradicate the Nazis. Another thesis, which she called the banality of evil, is that the people who were doing the gassing of people, the transportation of the Jews into gas chambers, didn't really understand what was happening. They were doing what was necessary for their own career development. And she said that they were not really evil people. It's just that they didn't understand the big picture of what was happening, and they needed to do what they were told to do to survive and to progress professionally and stuff like that. And sometimes I wonder if the reason Ethiopians, a lot of Ethiopian, high-ranking Ethiopians, and some with average people as well in Ethiopia did what they did against the grounds was also because it was necessary for them to do that to survive in the bureaucracy they were members of, in the community that they were members of. I know it's easy for people to say that what people were just cruel. Abiy Ahmed is a cruel human being, and the people who assisted him in killing about 100 million in Tigray are just cruel people, and there's nothing we could do. That is one way to understand the situation. The other one is to say there were reasons, there were underlying reasons, and we should spend time trying to understand why it is that people behaved in the way they behaved, so that at least in the future, you know, we educate people to make sure that that sort of cruelty doesn't happen. So that's why I'm trying to press you to sort of elicit your opinion about why you think people did the things they did against the grants, and why you think a lot of people didn't stand in solidarity with the grant, even though, like I said, it must have been very easy what was happening, and for them to see what was happening and to stand in solidarity. So I don't know if you would like to add, to weigh in a little bit on this issue. Otherwise, we could just go on to another topic.
No, I mean, that's a really good question. I think, of course, it would mainly be, you know, the cruelty of Abiy Ahmed and his Prosperity Party, but also, like, I don't think the career advancement couldn't be the only reason, because I know the whole entire country, every regional force was invited to attack Tigray. And then I seen how, well, of course, some regions were very willing, like Oromia and the Amhara region, and even Afar, they were ready to. So I don't know what would be the drive. Maybe there was a level of incentive, because of course the Somali regional forces were also invited to, of course, commit atrocities by the Prosperity Party. And I've seen the reactions from different communities. And of course, I'm not saying that some of the Somali forces, of course, did not participate in the Tigray genocide, but I've seen that when they were sent over there, a lot of them would just go into like the bushes or take, like, you know, Chad and record ENDF running away from TDF, and they just kind of turned it into like, but then also it's not, Somalis don't necessarily fight wars when it comes to for Ethiopia like that. That would never, it's really rare. But I think it would only be cruelty. I don't think that there's no level of incentive or career development that can be offered by committing mass murder. Like, I cannot imagine. But of course, maybe like someone who needs survival, but even then it's like, it's just, you know, I'd say it's cruelty, just cruelty, nothing more.
So from your interactions among your Somali circles, for instance, either from, I don't know, phone conversations with people in Jigjiga, do you sense that a lot of people have a sense of appreciation of the degree to which the Tigrayans were the Tigrayans were abused and discriminated against, and, you know, generally made to suffer? Do you sense that, or they generally buy into the regime's narrative that it was just a war against the junta and that nothing serious happened in Tigray?
I wouldn't say. I would say that a lot of the Somali people, of course, outside of the Prosperity Party, would not appreciative of the war on Tigray or the Tigray genocide. Of course, didn't have the media platform to engage. There were, of course, selected few that were voices for Abiy's government or Mustafa's government that were like, they're happy with what's happening. But a lot of people, of course, there's of course the community from Somalia as well that because of what happened in 2006 when ENDF invaded the capital city and was killing civilians, they associate, the EPRDF era with TPLF, which then a lot of people with the narrative that exists online is like TPLF is, Tigray. So there's of course a lot of people that were kind of indifferent or contributed to that hate speech where they were like, okay, this is happening because this happened to us, right? But in terms of like the Somali region or just in general, anyone who has that level of humanity, I feel like they were not so vocally appreciative of what was happening because they see the news, they see what's going on. They're like, this is kind of crazy that Eddie's drone striking his own people, quote unquote. But yeah, like it's of course a difference when I talk to communities from, maybe Amhara region or some, from Oromia, and they would say, oh, well, that many years of quote unquote darkness of that many years of, and I was like, well, that was an inclusive government that our Oromos were involved in and Amharas were involved in, everyone was involved in. But of course they attribute it to one ethnicity and then they justify what's happening to Tigrayans through that. But in terms of Somali people, I'm like a lot of the people that I speak to, but maybe I'm being biased and I'm just only talking to people that are completely against, what would happen in Tigray. But a lot of them are not, they're not happy with it. They'll openly call it what it is and a genocide.
Hmm. Well, that doesn't surprise me. Actually, one of the positive aspects is for the past 3 years has been that Tigrayans in Somalia were not discriminated against, and that was one bright spot. Even in Jigjiga, even I forgot the current president of Somalia. Maybe you remind me what was his name?
Hassan Shah? Or yeah,
No,
Hassan
the
Shah?
one in Jigjiga,
Mustafa? The current one or the old one
the
after
current one,
Mustafa?
the current one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mustafa.
Mustafa, yeah, Mustafa. Even Mustafa actually didn't abuse Tigrans or he didn't jail Tigrans, even though he said very, very nasty things on TV, but he didn't go out of his way to harass Tigrans in Jigjiga. So that was one of the bright spots. And I think that is something that sort of happens with people who are themselves oppressed. They tend to have a sense of understanding of what might be happening to other people, and they are less likely to be complicit in harassing other people. So that it doesn't surprise me. But to draw on a little bit on this, Hafsa, in one sense you are an outsider looking in because like you say, you're not born in Tigray and you're not a Tigrayan in the conventional sense of the word, although by all intent for intents and purpose now you have become an integral member of the Tigrayan community, not a Tigrayan. So in that sense, you're an outsider. And do you see sort of a future for Ethiopia as a country? I'm seeing, how other people have stood with the regime, how apart from the thing that you mentioned in Somalia and the thing that I mentioned in Somalia as a country, because I think grants have had enough with Ethiopia, and I think I would say the dominant view among Tigrayans now is that if we could have things our way, if we could find the way, we would go our own way. We would become independent. But what do you see should happen, or what do you see will happen? I don't know which one you wanted to answer, but I'm going to leave it to you.
I would probably say like at the moment the main thing would have to be probably co-federation, and then maybe everybody can divest. But I don't see it as any type of future as a as a country can be like a co-federation or a strengthened federalism until people have that opportunity to vote and decide what their future is. But I mean, I think the healthiest thing would be having the opportunity to get your voice heard.
Yeah, so we're about to finish. Hafsa, just one more point to raise from your essay. You say that well, you put the word peace within quotation marks. The peace agreement in Pretoria, apparently implying that you don't really believe is a true, genuine peace between Tigray and Ethiopia. So, first of all, why do you think it's not genuine peace? Advise the Tigrayan community to make sure that there is some sort of justice for victims?
Because many of the agreements or clauses on the cessation of hostilities agreement that was signed back in November, the Pretoria Agreement, has not been implemented. Everything from forces being taken out of certain parts of Tigray, everything from humanitarian aid, nothing has been officially implemented. It's been signed, there's been some relief, but it has not been implemented. So that's why I put it in quotation.
Yeah, but in terms of the advocacy by the Tigrayan community generally in the diaspora and especially in the US, with respect to peace, pushing for justice, and pushing for outside forces in Tigray to get out of Tigray, there's a lot of things that needs to be done, and you sense that there's some sort of fatigue among the Tigrayan community. I don't know if that is what you sense as well. Following the peace agreement, there's a general sense of loss of direction as well, because a lot of people were disappointed with what happened in Pretoria, because like I said, it's not really peace. So there is that sort of losing of energy. I don't know if you have sensed something similar. Maybe you have a different assessment and observation. But what do you think should the Tigrayan community, if you could have things your way, if you could just wave some sort of magic wand and tell the Tigrayan community to do one thing, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a really good question, but I don't think I'm in any place to recommend anything. I think I would just say, just continue,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's entirely my fault with my connection, but I don't know which where the connection stopped. But I was saying thank you for your time, Hafsa, and I was also trying to say that we're going to arrange another conversation for us to talk about Somali politics and a lot of aspects of Somali life and political affairs, social affairs that I and my listeners would be interested to know. So we're going to do that when your time allows. But for today, thank you very much for your time, Hafsa.
Thank you so much, Tahla. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and there's a lot to indulge in and talk about, and and definitely I'm available anytime to talk about the Somali region and Somalia and the politics in general.
Yeah, we're going to do that, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
Sure.
So that was that. Thank you for staying with us. And please, if you like what we are doing, don't forget to subscribe and to comment and to share with your friends and to make suggestions. We're always open for criticism, even very, very strong criticism. Suggestions, recommendations, and stuff like that. And until I see you next time, which I think might be next Friday with another interesting guest. Have a good time and bye-bye.